Howdy folks, it's Jake here at Walkie Farm at the home block at Wamargama. And if you watched yesterday's video, we did some creative grazing and pushed these guys into this lower riparian area, fencing them out of the pond there. This little steer obviously got bullied out of the paddock, so he's there wondering how he's going to get back in. And I'm wondering that too, actually. He's a little bit tall, a little bit younger than that, and we can chase them and they slip on underneath, but he knows he's going to get zapped on the way in because this fence is packing heat. Anyway, these cattle have been in this area for 18 hours. And I'm not checking them at the 18-hour mark for any special reason. It's just, I was just going for a pasture walk in our back bush block, checking. I've got a couple of Frisian cross steers up there competing with the kangaroos. I destocked that back paddock, thinking to give it a rest, and as soon as I took cattle out of it, masses of kangaroos turned up, mob of about 60, and just camped in there. And then I bought some Frisian steers, frustrated that all my grass was going to these kangaroos, and I put the steers in there, and there's a lot less kangaroo pressure in there now, which I thought was interesting. So it's not a great grazing environment. It's pretty well set stocked, but if I take my animals out of there, it's set stocked with wildlife anyway. Coming in and having a little bit of a look at the graze line, good pasture utilisation so far. You can see these fluffy bits. See them there? Where they haven't grazed. That is a manure. That's a cow poo spot from a previous trip through. And what that's telling me is that they've come back to this area quicker than they'd like to, and they can still smell that manure, and they know not to graze around it because it's dirty. Got a high chance of, upgrading their intestinal parasites, and they're mooing at me, which would also suggest that they want to move. But guys, you've got a good another 6-7 hours in this paddock because we're about to go to town and go to church, and then pick up some compost for Mrs. Walkie's garden beds. And then we're going to come back and do the garden beds, and then I'll come down and move you. So we've got a bit of time up our sleeve for you to show me what else you're grazing. I want to have a look at these wild roses. I wonder if that was you eating the tips of these eucalypts, these blue gums. Doesn't look like. It's not a uniform impact. They haven't touched these reeds at all. I can't blame them. If you grab them with your hands and slide your hands along them, they cut your fingers. They're so abrasive. You can see they've obviously camped down here. Their manure is starting to look better, a bit more fibrous, probably due to the paddock. The pastures are so fresh this early in the spring, and nothing's been sort of hitting that succession seeding phase yet, so it's just full of energy, and cows have had the squirts. But we can see we're getting a bit of fibre back into them, which is good. Anyone nibbled on this? Well, I was about to say no, but here we go. That looks too old though. I reckon that's... I don't know, all the tips are gone off this one. Yeah, that's fresh. So guys, they are trimming the tips off this wild rose. See how that's still green and sappy? Look, they've taken the tips off that. Off this. All over. Ah, that's exciting. Can you see that? Now guys, we're not going to fatten animals on this, especially if they're just taking the tiny little tips. Look at that. But it is really exciting to know that there's something in this plant that these animals want, and they're able to just nibble at it and get it. I think that's fun. I'd run a segment on my Facebook page, Walkie Farm Facebook page, called Weed or Feed, and I take photos of these sorts of plants. Look, It's all been tipped. I take photos of these sorts of plants and I put them on Facebook and I say weed or feed, and the cognitive dissonance that it spins everyone out into, all the conventional farmers and all the hobbyists that are trying to farm like the big boys, just become outraged that you would suggest a plant out of orthodoxy might have some sort of value. Look, that's all been grazed. That's all fresh, guys, look. Now, I'm not saying we just completely neglect our farms and let them be overrun by blackberries, because every now and then an animal might nibble a leaf of it. But I do suggest that these different plants, and you see how I said plants and before I said plants, I've got South Australian family, and in Australia the South Australians say plant and you go for a dance, and everywhere else says plant and dance. So I yo-yo back and forward because I've got a bit of blood from both states in me, and depends how I feel at the time. But what I would suggest is that, there we go, plants grow in certain areas, in certain spots at certain times for a reason. It's not an accident. All these plants here, and maybe that reason is that humans sowed them into the ground and forced them up with a heap of irrigated water and fertilizer. Or maybe that reason is compaction. There's a deep-rooted thistle coming to draw up deep minerals and reduce compaction and get the mineral cycle going. Who knows what the reasons are, but there's reasons, and I don't believe it's expedient to come and spray everything and throw all these toxic chemicals around. You get an audible eye roll when you start talking about chemicals being toxic and their impacts on human health, but you know, we're seeing global trends of chemicals that are legal in some countries being made illegal in others. Good examples of contentious herbicides are things like glyphosate, paraquat, atrazine. Atrazine's the one that it's illegal in Europe, and they're saying it's an endocrine disruptor. Are you full? If you look on the left side of your animal here, just in front of this hip, that's where you can see a little truth window, we call it. And you can see if they're full or not. So this animal, I would say, is not completely full. Can you see it's a bit sunken there? Whereas this one that's just turned away from me, she's pretty well flush. It is interesting looking at who is full and not. You've got to understand the breed you're dealing with when you're observing. Jerseys, for instance, have a much wider hip. There's a reason you're mooing at me. It's not like you've gorged yourself this morning, is it? You give me a pat? Good girl. Really enjoying spending more and more time with these animals and really letting them become friendly. We're going to open up our farm for a lot of tourism. And part of that tourism is having, what we're working to do is have a fenced in laneway around the property where people can do a self-guided tour. And it's important that we're going to have a secure laneway for them, but you know, we also need animals that are easy to handle and gentle and respect people. And I think we've got a pretty good mob here, folks. Anyway, this video is twice as long as I intended it to be. These animals here that are grazing this wild rose now, those two there, they're Jersey and Nguni first cross calves. Out of the way. What are you eating on the floor? Oh, everyone wants to be in the video. Wow, look at that. Look. folks, I was going to come back with a shovel and chip that out of my paddock. But since the cattle are in this paddock for another 6 hours, and we're at the pointy end now because they've already run out of all the yummy stuff and now they're having to get pushed into the less desirable. I'm really looking forward to seeing what those plants look like in 6 hours time. Maybe I'll bring down a small amount of hay and keep them in here another day and see what they can really do. Now guys, it's one thing to have an animal that'll eat a sown, irrigated, fertilised Italian rye, delicious, high protein, soft, easy to digest feed. It's another thing to have an animal that'll eat these rough, abrasive plants and turn them into high quality protein. And part of the long play for us with Nguni is understanding that the opportunities that are at scale out there in our country are all on land that's quite marginal and over time's really suited sheep production and goats. Don't you get cross with me. So when our herd grows, we started farming a bit under 5 years ago and we only started breeding about 3.5. We're running about 200 head now, and that's probably going to be 160 by the end of the year because looking like a dry season and we're destocking. But as our herd grows over time and there's more and more opportunities to scale in some of this harsher country, we need to be ready with an animal that can handle it. I think that's you.